Kalen's thumb brushed the edge of the data slate, the cold glass a sharp contrast to the feverish heat of his skin. He didn't look up, but he felt Zyra's presence like a pressure wave, an atmospheric shift that made the air in the stateroom of the obsidian apex feel too thin to breathe. She was a silhouette of sharp angles and iridescent chitin, standing by the viewport where the stars of the Terran Union looked like dying embers. "It is a binding of biology and law," Zyra said, her voice a series of melodic clicks filtered through a translator that failed to capture the predatory tilt of her words. "You understand that you cease to be a soldier of Earth. You become a piece of the hegemony." Kalen finally met her gaze. Her eyes were fractured gems, depthless and terrifyingly beautiful. He forced his heart to steady, though the rhythm thudded against his ribs like a trapped bird. "If they intend to swallow us," he whispered. The words meant more for himself than her. "I shall provide the heartburn." Zyra tilted her head. A soft, scraping sound followed the movement, her armor-like skin meeting the high collar of her royal vestments. She didn't understand the idiom, but she felt the defiance. Truth is, she had expected him to break. Most did. It had started 3 weeks ago in a subterranean bunker beneath Geneva. The air had smelled of recycled oxygen and desperation. General Vance Kalen's fatherhead looked older than the craters on the moon. The Vorith hegemony hadn't fired a single shot. They had simply parked their fleet in high orbit and issued the fusion mandate. It was a legal strangulation. Marry the archdaughter, merge the species, or watch the atmosphere burn. The math of survival is a cage, Kalen had told his father, staring at the holographic ultimatum, and I intend to pick the lock. Now standing in the heart of the enemy's flagship, the scale of that cage felt crushing. The obsidian apex didn't just fly, it thrummed with a low-frequency vibration that settled in his marrow. Everything was dark stone and glowing violet conduits. It was a place designed to make a human feel small, a soft creature in a world of chitin. Yet he refused to shatter. Zyra moved closer. The scent of ozone and something floral like night-blooming jasmine during a thunderstorm trailed after her. She reached out, her hand hovering inches from his cheek. Her fingers were long, tipped with delicate lethal points. Kalen didn't flinch. He watched the way the violet light reflected off her scales. He wondered if she could feel the sheer velocity of his thoughts. "You are remarkably still," she observed. "Is this human courage, or have you simply accepted your extinction?" "Neither," Kalen said. He stepped into her space, closing the gap until the heat from his chest began to warm the cold surface of her chest plate. It was a gamble, an intimacy that bordered on a challenge. "It's a long game, Zyra, and the stars belong to those still standing when the dust settles." Her ocular slits widened. For a second, the mechanical hum of the ship seemed to fade, replaced by the ragged sound of Kalen's breathing. He saw the slight tremor in her hand, not from fear, but from a sudden, sharp curiosity. The gap between them was no longer just a vacuum of culture and war. It was a live wire. He had to find the cracks in their laws. He had to learn the rhythm of her heart before he could stop the machine she represented. But as her fingers finally grazed his jaw, a touch that was surprisingly light, almost tentative, Kalen realized the lock he intended to pick might be his own. The pressure in the trial chamber was absolute, a physical weight that threatened to collapse Kalen's lungs. He stood in the center of the abyss, a localized gravity well designed to crush the resolve of any who dared claim equality with the Voroth. His vision blurred, the edges of the room turning into a smear of violet and black. He could feel the blood thumping behind his eyes, a frantic rhythmic warning that his body was reaching its limit. High above, Zyra watched from the observation tier. Her expression remained unreadable, but her hands were gripped tight on the railing. Truth is, no human had ever survived the first cycle of the trials. It wasn't just about strength. It was about the fundamental rejection of one's own fragility. Kalen sank to one knee, the deck plating searing through his uniform. The gravity doubled. He gasped for air that felt like liquid lead, his fingers clawing at the stone. But as his mind began to fracture under the strain, he didn't focus on the pain. He focused on the text he had memorized in the dark hours of the ship's transit. the ancient, dusty precedents of the Hegemony's own founding. He forced his head up, meeting Zyra's fractured gaze. Under the third protocol of the Union, he choked out, the words scraping his throat like broken glass. Survival is not the only metric of worth. I invoke the clause of unbroken intent. The gravity didn't lift, but the hum of the chamber changed. It shifted from a roar to a sharp, questioning whine. The High Counselors leaned forward in their seats. Ironically, the Vorth had spent centuries perfecting their cruelty, yet they were slaves to their own rigid legality. By invoking a forgotten religious precedent from their era of unification, Kalen had turned the trial from a slaughter into a legal debate. He didn't just stand up. He fought for every inch, his muscles screaming, his bones humming with the threat of snapping. He was a soft creature in a world of chitin, but his will was a jagged edge. When the gravity finally cut out, the silence that followed was more deafening than the pressure. Kalen didn't fall. He swayed, his breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts, but he stayed upright. The math of survival is a cage, he said, his voice stronger now, echoing off the high, dark arches of the chamber. But you forgot that even a cage has a key. By surviving the abyss with an invoked intent, I am no longer a consort. I am a co-sovereign. Zyra descended from the tier, her movements fluid and strangely hurried. When she reached him, she didn't offer a hand to steady him. Instead, she placed her palm flat against his chest, right over his hammering heart. The heat of him seemed to startle her, a stark reminder of the biological fire that drove his defiance. You have broken the cycle, she whispered, the clicking in her voice softened by something that sounded almost like wonder. The mandate was meant to consume you. Instead, you have forced a seat at the table. It's not just a seat, Kalen replied, leaning slightly into her touch. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak, but the victory was a spark in his gut. It's a reformation. We aren't your trophy, Zyra. We're your partners. The Sovereignty Pact was signed 3 solar cycles later. It wasn't a surrender, but it was the end of the Hegemony's absolute rule. As Kalen stood on the balcony of the High Council, looking out over a galaxy that was no longer a hunting ground, he felt a familiar presence at his side. Zyra didn't look at the stars. She looked at him. The journey ahead would be long, filled with the grinding friction of 2 cultures trying to find a shared rhythm. But as Kalen watched the first Terran ships dock peacefully at the Obsidian apex, he knew the lock had finally clicked open. The stars belonged to those still standing when the dust settled, and for the first time in history, they were standing together.